Into the Revenue Service IRS tax news. Understanding the credit for other dependents. One question that always gets me scratching my head is, if you're able to wheel out a corpse during an IRS audit, can you claim the other dependents credit for that corpse? Because I mean, like, if being a corpse is all it takes to become president of the United States, normal people should get a little extra credit for their zombie dependents too. I mean, after all, it's not fair to discriminate against the undead. They're part of the underserved community. 6 feet under. Oh. Anyways, they're totally underserved, even though they're currently represented in the highest office in the land. And in the spirit of equity, President Biden having passed a new equity, not equality, mind you, equity executive order just before like the last 3-day holiday. A very brave move on his part, by the way, because you know, equality, it's so last century, man. It's so last century. And like the century before that, and the one before that, basically going back to like Plato or whatever, people have understood the concept of equality, even if not having always practiced it, of course.
My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
You see, look at that. Honestly, so outdated. So outdated. Sounds like equality under the law, not equity under the law. I mean, where'd he get that crap? From like the U.S. Constitution? Or worse, the Bible? I mean, come on, man.
Come on, man. What are we talking about?
Everyone knows the law needs to be directly tied to the specific hue of the individual.
When the star-bellied children went out to play ball, could a plain belly get in the game? Not at all. You only could play if your bellies had stars, and the plain-bellied children had none upon theirs.
Honestly, I think this new equity term is actually some secret plot to like collect everyone's DNA so that they can like track not only each individual's movement, but the movement of each individual's individual cells. But anyways, that's just a bit of a conspiracy theory maybe. But the point is, equality is totally outdated now, man. So in the spirit of equity, zombies should get even bigger credits than non-zombies, you know? And I think we're getting there. I mean, we're progressing so fast. I wouldn't be surprised if we soon have situations where a zombie might not qualify for a credit at first, but after being dead for a while, their skin tone might darken to the point where they not only qualify for the credit, but also start receiving government reparation payments. Or possibly we'll have situations where the opposite happens, where someone becomes a zombie and was able to qualify for the credit, but then their skin tone lightens up after death to the point where they no longer qualify anymore. I'm not sure what happens after death to the skin tone. I don't work in an obituary or whatever. Honestly, who knows at this point? The government's getting so strange that high-ranking bald white male officials stealing minority women's luggage and wearing very culturally specifically inspired dresses from said luggage for like, decades isn't even news. I mean, hell, it's probably the reason he landed the job in the first place, for crying out loud. That's how crazy. You gotta wonder what that guy said to people when they asked, where he got his one-of-a-kind fashion sense. He probably even told them the truth, and nobody believed him. He's like, yeah, I got it from baggage claim. And everyone's like, okay, whatever. You're so crazy. Anyways, honestly, my last client wanted to understand the dependence credit better because he thought it would help him convince his relatives to give him a loan. I asked him to pay in advance for the advice. IRS Tax Tip 2023-22, February 23rd, 2023. Taxpayers with dependents who don't qualify for the child tax credit may be able to claim the credit for other dependents. They can claim this credit in addition to the child and dependent care credit and the earned income credit. Here's more information to help taxpayers determine whether they're eligible to claim the credit for other dependents on their 2022 tax return. So when we think about dependents, oftentimes the first thing that comes to mind are the children as a dependent, and then you often think about the child tax credit as one of the bigger kind of credits that might be applicable to that kind of dependent. But if they're not a qualifying child, then you might think, you might still have in your mind like the concept of an exemption. So we used to have this concept of exemptions being one of the kind of benefits of having a dependent, but they changed the law a few years back, and instead of having the exemption, we have basically the credit. So now you've got the idea of, is someone a dependent? If they are a dependent, are they a qualifying child? Because that's probably going to lead to more benefits than if they're not a qualifying child. If they're not a qualifying child, could they still be qualified as an other dependent? Because if they're as an other dependent, you may be able to at least get the benefit of the credit for the other dependent credit, as well as possibly having some impacts in other areas of the tax return as well. So the maximum credit amount is $5,000 for each dependent who meets certain conditions. This credit can be claimed for dependents of any age, including those who are age 18 or older, dependents who have Social Security numbers or Individual Taxpayer Identification numbers, dependents' parents or other qualifying relatives supported by the taxpayer, dependents living with the taxpayer who aren't related to the taxpayer. The credit begins to phase out when the taxpayer's income is more than $200,000. This phase out begins for married couples filing a joint tax return at $400,000. So obviously you got the single versus the married on the phase out. Taxpayers can claim this credit if they claim the person as a dependent on their taxpayer's return. They cannot use the dependent to claim the child tax credit or additional child tax credit. So the general thought process again with these dependents would be, do they qualify for a dependent first? If they do, can I claim the child? Do they qualify as a qualifying child? Because that would generally be pretty much in all cases a bigger credit tax situation. And if not, then would they still qualify as an other dependent? The dependent is a U.S. citizen, national, or resident alien. Taxpayers can use the Does My Child Dependent Qualify for the Child Tax Credit or the Credit for Other Dependents tool on IRS.gov to help determine if they are eligible to claim the credit. So there's kind of like a questionnaire that you can go through. So they have a resource here. So if there's questions about whether or not they qualify, you can go there. You can also use the free file software, which might take you to a link to other distributors of the software, and the software sometimes can help you to determine whether or not someone qualifies as a dependent to some degree as well. So more information can be found at the links below. Topic number 602, Child and Dependent Care Credit and Earned Income Tax Credit. There's links to all that stuff here. There'll be a link to this in the description.